Children's Storytime, presented by BMGFly. Assalamu alaikum. That means peace be unto you. Today we're reading Abdul's story by Jamilah Thompkins-Bigelow, illustrated by Tiffany Rose, read to you by Nia Malika Dixon. Today we'll be reading Abdul's story by Jamilah Thompkins-Bigelow, illustrated by Tiffany Rose. Abdul's story. Abdul loved stories. Abdul loved to tell stories. He told one about the high-stepping kids who collected donations in boots, another about the teenagers who danced in subway cars. He had one about the bow-tie-wearing man hawking bean pies on Broad Street, and even one about the woman who sold water ice from her basement on hot summer days. My man is full of stories. Writing these stories was hard, though. Making lowercase b face the right way was tricky. P and S too. Silent letters were downright sneaky. How could Abdul know there was an E if it never made a sound? Abdul loved straight lines like the ones his barber shaved, but Abdul's scribbly, scratchy, scrawly letters never stayed on any line. What is Abdul to do? During writing period each day, he wrote, then erased his mistakes. Wrote, then erased. Wrote, then erased. His classmates had neat sentences. Abdul had smudges. Why write his stories anyway? The people and places in his school books never looked or sounded like the people or places he knew. Some stories are for books, Abdul decided, but not his. Sounds so frustrating. What is Abdul to do? One day, Abdul's class had a visitor. Mr. Muhammad had lines straighter than straight around his beard and hairline. His sneakers, like Abdul's, had not a single crease or scuff. Mr. Muhammad was a writer. He read a story about a watchful boy with hair shaved low and skin the color of night. Women braided hair on the front steps in this story. Girls with clacking beads jumped rope, and men in white thobes prayed on the sidewalk outside a full storefront mosque. The boy watched over this community. Write new stories with new superheroes, Mr. Muhammad said. I really like Mr. Muhammad's stories. They sound very familiar. Abdul pressed his paper down firmly. He could be an author like Mr. Muhammad, but B played tricks again. Mr. Muhammad walked around reading each child's work. He was getting close. Does the silent E go here? Silent U? Erase, erase, erase. Abdul, I understand your struggle. Abdul tried writing neatly. Write, erase, erase, rip! He slammed down his pencil. Jada and Kwame had pages of words. Abdul had a hole. Abdul slid down under the table. He imagined an eraser big enough to erase himself. Poor Abdul. Well, that eraser is really big. He has such a great imagination, Abdul. Nice sneaks. Can I see your story? Mr. Muhammad asked. I don't got a story, Abdul whispered. Everyone has stories, but I can't write like them, Abdul pointed. Me neither, Mr. Muhammad said. Come with me. I want to show you my notebook. That's a mess. I get messy words out so good words can come too. I fix the mess later. Before walking away, he said, Keep trying. That gave Abdul an idea. Bismillah, he said. Wow, look at Mr. Muhammad's notebook. I wonder what Abdul's idea is. Snap! Okay, Abdul. Abdul scribbled words and made mistakes without erasing. He wrote around the hole, filling the page. I wrote a mess like yours, Abdul told Mr. Muhammad. Mr. Muhammad smiled. Find a great story in there. Abdul squinted. He saw words misspelled, but wondrous and sloppy-looking sentences he loved. That was his idea. No more erasers. It's okay to make mistakes. Over the next few days, Abdul rewrote a less messy mess. Then, an even less messy mess. He smiled when he read his stories to himself. But when it was time to hand it in, he didn't feel like smiling. That's sloppy, Jada said. You spelled a word wrong, Kwame added. Abdul slipped his paper underneath the others. Some kids are writers, Abdul thought, but not me. Days later, Mr. Muhammad returned. I loved your stories, he exclaimed. I had to read one again and again. It was so good. Everyone sat up. Everyone except Abdul. Kwame whispered, I bet it was mine. I spelled every word right. Jada whispered back, he probably liked mine. I have the best handwriting in the class. Look at Abdul. He's looking nervous. Mr. Muhammad started reading the story aloud in a clear voice. It was about a boy with tall hair, shaped with sharp lines, and skin the orange-brown of sunrise. He watched over the kids stomp, stepping down the block, and the ones breaking to the beat of a city train. He even protected the grown-ups who sold things and were like family. Abdul sat up. It was his story. And then Mr. Muhammad paused. He frowned at the page. Abdul's cheeks burned. Everyone listened, wide-eyed and silent. Mr. Muhammad read on, stopping a few more times at mistakes until he reached the end of the story. That was by Abdul, Mr. Muhammad said. Man, that sounds so cool. He kept reading the story. Abdul slowly looked up. Everyone stared. Were they smiling? Yes, and clapping too. Great story, Kwame told Abdul. I loved it, said Jada. Oh, Abdul is on the come up. When they returned to their writing, Abdul whispered to Mr. Muhammad, "What about my mistakes?" "Writers make mistakes. We'll work on them." As they worked, Abdul thought, "Some people are writers, and I am one of them." Man, I really love this story. Wow, the end. I hope you enjoyed that story as much as I did. And if you want to read it again, go to your library and ask for Abdul's Story by Jamilah Thompkins-Bigelow, illustrated by Tiffany Rose. All right, I'll see you next week.